Unrehearsed Creepypasta Narration, Part 17, I believe. This is the story of when we were 18, my friends and I played the staircase game. Not everyone survived. This is segment B. It's a bit of a longer story. Staircase 2. As we walked down the second staircase, that same darkness full of lively birdsong surrounded us again. The birdsong sounded even more wildly out of place than before. I wanted badly to talk about what I had just seen. The shapes that had been so beautiful and horrible at the same time. But I couldn't say anything aloud on the stairs, not without breaking one of the rules of the staircase game. So to distract myself, I counted off the steps. It should have reassured me that the only thing I could hear was our ragged breathing. Instead, I kept thinking about the claws scratching at the door. Would we have enough time if they broke down the door down? All too soon we arrived at the end of the staircase. Jonathan pulled open the door ahead and we stepped out onto a moonlit beach. We stood at the edge of a vast ocean. Moonlight turned the waves black. They lapped at us, stealing the sand from under our feet. A salty wind swept over us, though instead of bringing the briny smell I expected, it brought something sweet and metallic instead. Wait. A horrible thought crossed my mind, one provoked by familiarity of that scent. I bent down to inspect the ocean more closely, and instantly knew that we did not stand in water. Now can we talk about what's going on? Asked Jonathan. I need to throw up, I replied, and stumbled away from the sea of blood all around us. There were tall cliffs set further back on the beach. They reminded me of the white cliffs of Dover, not just because of their beauty, because of the sense of history they held. These cliffs had stood here on this beach for 500 billion years already, and would continue to do so for another 500 billion years. No matter what else happened, staring at those cliffs, I somehow knew great and terrible wars had been fought here. The blood of slain armies had stained the ocean red, transforming into what it was now. After emptying my stomach of everything I had eaten for lunch, breakfast, and dinner for the last night, I walked back in time to see Margot and Jonathan arguing fiercely, practically shouting each other's faces. You need to get a grip, snapped Margot, as Jonathan was recalcitrant toddler. We don't have time for your hysterics. I'm sorry I didn't tell you more about the game in advance, but we have to focus on finding the next staircase before we're stuck here. It's more than that, Margot. What else aren't you telling us about the game? I instinctively did what I always do, act as the peacemaker between Margot and whoever she's arguing. Hey, stop fighting. We're all freaking out here. Let's take a deep breath and step back. As usual, everyone ignored me. Margot looked right past me at Jonathan and said, frostily, I've told you everything I know. Winning the game is how we get back home. So can we get on with this? Jonathan gave her a disgusted look. You love this. You love the fact that we're trapped in some kind of horror movie right now. You don't actually give a fuck about going home. If it was up to you, we'd stay here forever. Jonathan turned away and waded deeper in the sea. I hurled out from Jonathan, wait, where are you going? There's a door over there. It must lead to the next staircase, right? Said Jonathan bitterly, pointing at a seemingly empty patch of darkness. The waves hid what he pointed at, yet when I kept my eyes trained there, in between the wave and the next, I saw the gray door. It was half submerged, only the very top visible. Then it was gone, obscured from view. I had no idea how Jonathan had even managed to spot in the first place. The tide pulled me further away from the safety of the beach. Jonathan was tall enough that the water, or rather blood, only hit his thighs. Meanwhile, I was already chest deep. I wanted to keep moving forward. I would have to swim, which I really didn't want to have to do. I imagined ducking my head under all that thick blood and being completely surrounded by it, feeling it pressed against my face like something alive. I took one tiny step further in and stopped. Against all logic, the blood felt warm against my skin instead of cold. That was better, though, wasn't it? How much worse would it have been to swim in cold or cooling blood? We've wasted enough time, said Margot, coming up to stand beside me. You know we're standing in blood, right? She dove in without a reply or hesitation, though I saw her grimace as the blood washed over her. I don't think I can do this, I thought. But they were already more than 20 feet ahead of me. Apparently I was the only one who had a problem of diving into a literal sea of blood. I took another tiny step forward, and this time a wave lifted me right off my feet and bowled me over. The current curled around me and tugged me forward like an impatient child. I swam, doing my best not to think about what I was swimming in. It was weirdly similar to swimming in water, so I concentrated moving forward, slicing my arms through the blood and paddling my feet. And tried not to dwell on the taste of iron in my mouth. I really, really, really didn't want to get left behind. Something brushed my ankle. Seaweed? I scoffed at myself. What could live in a sea of blood? Then again, technically none of this is possible. The post said the staircase took us to different dimensions. What if the very laws of nature differed from dimension to dimension? What if the staircase took us to places so different from our own world that air itself was toxic to us? Or the gravity tripled and crushed us all into pulp? Preoccupied with my thoughts, I hardly noticed when something brushed to my feet again. Then, that was unmistakably a hand closed around my ankles and started dragging me downward. Stupidly, I opened mouth and screamed to help. And of course, blood filled. I swallowed convulsively, mouthing and gagged. Thank God I'd already emitted the contents of my stomach. Otherwise, if I had anything else to throw up, I would have. The blood closed over me and I couldn't see anything. I struggled to break free of the iron grip my ankle, pummeling at whatever held my ankle. It let go of me. I swam up toward the distant moonlight, my lungs aching with the need to suck in great lungful. My head broke the surface right as I heard Mario. Alex, where are you? I could dimly see her, Jonathan, treading water next to a half-hidden door. I spat out blood. There's something in the water. It coughing fit. It dragged me down. God, the taste of blood was awful. I swam toward them, still spitting out blood. Funny to think I had been so concerned about grossing Jonathan out earlier. And now I looked like an extra from the set of Carrie. The only comfort I had was that, although they hadn't been dunked in the blood quite as thoroughly as me, Jonathan nor Margot had escaped entirely unscathed. Margot slid her hand along the door before uttering a triumphant cry and wrenching the door open. I expected to see a blood to flow downstairs, but somehow an invisible barrier stopped it. The sea simply split around the open doorway. Only a few droplets of blood splattered down onto the steps, leading into the darkness. I peered down. What color is that? Gray, said Margot decisively, and the staircase before that was red. I admired the fact that she had been the presence of mind to note down the color of the last staircase we'd been running for our very lives. This was easy. Sure, if the sight, smell, touch, and taste of blood doesn't make you puke nonstop, more to the point, glanced at her sidelong and said resignedly, Did you have to jinx it? Right on cue, the sea started to ripple and churn around us. Frothy blood sprayed out into the night as we watched disembodied arms emerge from the depths and reached out for us like sunflowers orienting themselves toward the sun. They were small, like the arms of children, but too thin to be anything human. All of them were white and somehow untouched by all that blood. Once more I felt hands brushing against my feet. Cold fingers closed around my ankle. Let's go, yelled Jonathan. Move it. I reached out to Margot, and just as our hands clasped together, the arms below tugged on me in earnest, forcing my head back under the blood and wrenching my arm painfully in its socket. A brief tug of war ensured Margot wouldn't let go, so the hands below began to pull her down with me. I wondered for a moment if I should simply let go of Margot's hand. I was the weak link here after all, and the hands held me and not my friends. But fear overrode my noble intentions. I didn't want to die, and especially not like this, my lungs filling with blood, and my last sight the white cliffs staring down at me impassively. By some miracle, Jonathan pulled us both through the doorway. 1 second, my hand slid inexorably out of Margot's, my fingernails leaving deep furrows in her skins, and I tried to hang on. Next, my feet were on solid ground. It was strange being on the side of the invisible barrier that stopped the sea. Occasionally, blood sprayed through onto us. Not that it could much worse. Our clothes, our hair, our skin, everything dripped blood, and we left puddles behind us. It was going to be even worse when it dried. Jonathan took a deep breath ahead of me. I knew with sudden fear that he was going to speak. Useless knowledge, because there was no way for me to stop him. No way, unless I broke one of the rules of the game myself and let go of Margot's hand. "Do you think," said Jonathan. Then he realized his mistake. He clapped his hand over his mouth as if he could stuff the words back down his throat. It was too late. Those 3 words echoed through the darkness, and the birdsong abruptly stopped, as if someone had switched it off with a remote. I threw a quick glance over my shoulder to try and gauge how many more steps we had to go. The sight wasn't reassuring. Margot tugged on my hand urgently, and I picked up the pace to match hers. Even though this meant that I kept nearly slipping on puddles of blood, suddenly a great wind buffeted us, and we were forced to slow to a snail's pace. The wind kept trying to blow us back up the stairs. Hungry shrieks filled the darkness, but then the flashlights and the bagpipes were in our hands. But none of them worked save for one, the one Jonathan held. The sea of blood had ruined nearly everything inside our backpack. Even that one flashlight sputtered in the darkness on the verge of going out, yet it cast out enough light to reveal the birds high above us. The ones that had been chirping and singing, except they weren't birds. I caught a glimpse of something staring down at us, with an insane, hate-filled eyes, a human face, but had the body of an enormous eagle. It spread its giant gray-brown wings, opened its mouth to reveal needle-sharp teeth, and screamed at us with a woman's voice. Other hungry cries filled the air. How had we ever mistaken that for birdsong? We scrambled down the steps as fast as we could, helping each other up whenever one of us fell. Jonathan dropped the flashlight, and it didn't matter. We didn't need to see them to know they were coming for us. I don't know who fell, Jonathan or Margot, but whoever it was brought all of us down. We tumbled down the stairs, thumping against one painful step after another. It was impossible to keep holding hands. I continued to fall head over heels until I smashed into the ground right beside Margot, and I staggered up somehow, my ears ringing. I pulled Margot to her feet. Her eyes fluttered. She was only half conscious and would have slumped right back down to the ground if I hadn't caught her at the last second. Jonathan was sitting up already, holding his left hand out in front of himself. The fall had crumpled it into something broken and bleeding. Between the 2 of us, we managed to drag Margot with us as we limped to the door. I tugged on the handle, hearing the shrieks growing louder behind us. By now, the ringing in my ears had fully stopped, and I could hear what sounded like words in the screams behind us. I pulled on the door handle with all my strength, praying that we weren't too late, praying we wouldn't feel sharp talons digging into our unprotected backs. When the door finally opened and we stumbled through from one horror to another. Staircase 3. The stench hit us first. The unmistakable aroma of blood, urine, feces, and rot. Bright sunlight illuminated it all in brutal detail. Corpses stacked together in huge mounds, so that they loomed over us and seemed to stretch into the sky endlessly. The bodies were naked, obscenely mutilated. Those that still had intact faces stared at us unseeingly with their cloudy eyes. It was as if some giant hand had carelessly thrown them to the ground. Yet there was a clear pathway between the bodies. It curved to the left and disappeared from our sight. The sky was black with crows. They flew in circles overhead and perched on the corpses they could reach. They called merrily to each other and us while they feasted on the dead. Some of them have gorged themselves full, yet they kept pecking. They still kept pecking away, tearing away strips of rotting flesh. As I watched one crow expertly peeled someone's face off, revealing the decaying muscles of fat just underneath. "It's my turn to throw up," said Jonathan. He instantly leaned over and vomited noisily. But I didn't feel disgusted. The sight was too much, too unreal. It was like seeing the pages of some illustrated storybook spread out before us. My mind simply could not comprehend it. If I didn't look at the faces of the corpses, I could pretend they weren't real. I could pretend they were simply Halloween decorations. Yes, that seemed safe. There was no need to examine them any more closely, or to think about how they must have died in pain and terror. Margot groaned. "Where are we?" She started to get up and froze. I cleared my throat. "I think it's some sort of maze." "A maze? Why?" I shrugged, uncomfortable. "I don't know. The way the bodies are stacked, they're like the walls of the labyrinth," I trailed off. I was pretty sure that I was right. It was a labyrinth made of corpses, and the door to the next staircase would be at the center. I glanced at Jonathan. He looked exhausted. Under the sunlight, his hand was even worse than I thought. 3 fingers had been bent backward or sideways into broken sticks, and they were beginning to swell. He tried to smile at me. "It's not as bad as it looks." It was exactly as bad as it looked. Maybe even worse, but if pretending otherwise helped him get through this, so much the better. Unlike everyone else, I had been lucky enough to escape the fall with nothing more than a few bruises. Jonathan and Margot's injuries meant that we couldn't go as quickly as we should have, and we kept running into dead ends. I suppose we could have split up and tried to climb through the gaps in the rotting bodies, but by unspoken agreement, we stayed together and on the path. None of us said anything aloud. We all knew we were running out of time. I watched the sun tread its path across the sky, leaving behind its flames of blazing yellow, marigold, and pale pink. It was the most beautiful sunset I'd ever seen. I couldn't appreciate it. Its indifferent beauty seemed to mock all the corpses strewn there. And just as the last of the sun dipped below the horizon, the corpses woke up. Someone whispered my name. "Alexandra, Alexandra," in a deep guttural tone that the current person narrating this can't fucking do. I looked around to see who had spoken, and stared straight at the corpse on my right. I couldn't help but take several step backs, my mind reeling in horror. It said, in its broken voice, "They came from the sky. We asked them to come down, to help us. They rounded us all up, and took us into their ships. They killed us, Alex." Another corpse turned its head toward me. The crows had eaten away its nose and lips, but it still had its eyes. They danced with silver fires. It said, "Alex, I watched my son die. They made me watch. They took my son apart until he was nothing but lumps of flesh. And then they laughed. All around us the corpses stirred, opened their mouths and spoke. Most talked about the ways they had died. Others talked about their regrets, their mistakes, their loved ones. We all spoke at once, so that it was nearly impossible to distinguish one voice from another. I could only catch disjointed words and phrases. Margot stood by the small mutilated body of a child, whereas Jonathan stared at a corpse that had only a head and a torso left. I couldn't hear what the dead whispered to them, and I couldn't pretend that these bodies were just Halloween decorations anymore. If we didn't get out of here soon, I was going to lose my mind. I was about to go to my friends to tell them that we had to leave right now, when another corpse spoke from beside me. "Margot is lying to you." "What?" I moved closer. Scraps of flesh clung to its weathered skull, and it stared at me with empty, gaping eye sockets. I waited for it to say more. Waited for countless more minutes until I realized that it had said all it would. I shook my head. It must have lied to me to keep me here longer. I ran over to Margot and had to physically drag her away from the dead child, my hand tight on her arm. "We need to go, Margot," I said through gritted teeth. Finally, she stopped struggling to get away from me and turned to give me confused eyes. She asked, "How long has it been?" and sounded close to crying. "I don't know," I replied. "Help me with Jonathan." It took the both of us to tug him away, and by then we were all out of breath and sweating, but we had to hurry. How much time had we lost listening to the dead? We scurried through the labyrinth frantically, trying to keep track of all its twists and turns, keenly aware our time was running out. When we finally reached the center of the maze, we saw 3 blue doors floating there instead of one. "Well, fuck," said Jonathan, summarizing my own thoughts perfectly. "We'll have to try all of them." I marched toward and opened up the first door on the left. The staircase. "Is this one yellow?" "Margot, is that one of the colors?" "No," said Margot. She made no move to inspect any of the doors herself, and I wondered what the corpse had said to her. Jonathan reached out with his uninjured hand to open another one. "This one's blue." "So is this one," I said. "Let's try counting the steps." Both staircases had 100 steps. We both looked at Margot then, because she knew the game best. But she simply gazed back at us. Her face was pale and drawn. She looked like a child who just seen the monster hiding under the bed. "Margot, come on," I said, trying to sound calm, even though I knew I felt anything but. "Do you have any idea which door to choose?" Margot shook her head. "I don't know. I don't know." Tears spilled out of her eyes. The doorknob shivered under my hand, and suddenly I was holding something soft and stretchy as the doorknob was turning into taffy. I looked across the door, across Jonathan, and saw that it was beginning to melt as well. "Oh, fuck this. We're going in," I said arbitrarily, and picking the door closest to Jonathan. I strode over, flung it back open, even as the doorknob dissolved in my hand, leaving behind a foul-smelling liquid. "Are you sure?" "There's a 50% chance it's the right one," I said. We all went inside, and the door slammed shut behind us, enclosing us now in the familiar darkness. I prayed that we hadn't chosen the wrong door.